Working with dates and times in any platform is always a challenge, whether it's a database or web framework, whatever. Getting it right can be really, really, really difficult. So let's see how RethinkDB does it, and let's take a look at our invoices table here. And this is an invoice, as you would expect. This comes from the Chinook database. And notice that I have an invoice date, and it has a very certain format. This is the way the RethinkDB driver handled the insert of the invoices record. So it takes a date from JavaScript and turns it into what you saw there. So let's pluck that invoice date out, and you can see the format once again. It even comes with a time zone at the very end. You notice it's all zeros. That's because I am in Europe currently. So I can filter this table, and I can filter on that date. So for this, I'll use a callback function, and I'll send in the individual invoice. And here I'm going to return the invoice date, and then I can use a comparison function, .gt, which is .greater than. And I want to check for all invoices greater than January 1st, 2012. And it just works, which surprised me. Believe it or not, I was expecting to do all kinds of gymnastics to get the dates to work right because working with JavaScript and dates, well, it's just not terribly fun. But RethinkDB handles it elegantly. Okay, let's do a little bit more here. Let's take a look at all the invoices that we just queried. And that's 162 invoices generated since January 1st, 2012. How can we look at the invoices only for the year 2012? Let's try and do that by chaining on less than, or .lt. And here I'll just say the date should be less than 2012, 12/31, and 412. That's a little bit counterintuitive, isn't it? Let's take a look at what exactly we got back here. Yeah. So we have a bunch of invoices. We actually have two subsets. We have a set of invoices with the invoice date greater than January 1st, 2012, and a subset that is less than 12/31/2012, so it gave us back both. That's not very good. So let's use .and see what it gives us. Yeah, same thing. A lot of invoices, and that's not exactly what we wanted. I would have thought that it would have applied, well, let's say a between condition here, but it doesn't. It actually brings us two different subsets of invoices, and try as I might to come up with an explanation for this, I can't. It's just not the way the API works. But the good news is, there is a better way. If all we want is the invoices from the year 2012, well, we can specify year, sort of. I'll show you what I mean in a second. I'll use double equals here and see what happens. And I think I'll remove pluck and count because I want to see all the invoices that are returned, just in case I have to do some sleuthing, and no results at all. That's weird. I've specified that I want the year to equal 2012. Let's dive into this a little bit. Here, it's just trying to do a straight coercion comparison. If you've ever used JavaScript before, you know that this causes problems. I'm trusting that .year is returning an integer value of 2012, but, well, can't really be too sure about that, can we? So let's take away the double equals, and instead, I'm going to use .eq. Now you might be thinking, why don't you just use triple equals here? That's a strict comparison, and that's what you're supposed to do in JavaScript, and you are right. But it won't solve my problem, because my problem is actually a little bit deeper than this. So for this, I'm going to use .eq. And this is an equality comparison function that RethinkDB gives you. And I would highly suggest using this always, because it's going to handle all kinds of cases. So let's see what happens when I run this now. I get an exception. That is something that is surprising, and not a time pseudotype. The thing that's actually throwing that exception is the .year function, as I'm trying to coerce a year out of something that is not a time pseudotype. I'll talk more about that in a second. The next thing that appears to be happening is I'm comparing an exception to the number 2012. I don't know if that's the case. Either way, what I know is that exception was not thrown until I did .eq. So I did some sleuthing offline here, and I found that if I just did a map and I returned the invoice date .year just to see what it is, well, I get the exception there as well. I don't know why it wasn't throwing when I was trying to do the comparison before. I can only guess that it's just a little quirk in the release candidate. However, it is just a strangeness that you should know about if you're trying to follow along. So if you use .eq, everything should be okay. But how do we solve this weird issue with this time pseudotype? What is this after all? Well, the short answer is that when RethinkDB was released, they didn't have support for dates. That was a long time ago. And since then, they have supported a number of different data types, and date and time is one of them. And so the way they do this is they create what's called a pseudotype. It's a bit of a manufactured way of handling specific kinds of data. You'll see this with geometry data and other kinds of data inside of RethinkDB. So for dates and times, they want it in a certain format, as you see here, with a time zone attached, because that's very important when you're trying to do time calculations. So while all of that is interesting and neat, why am I getting this error? After all, I stored this as a date. And you can see the formatting there is specific to RethinkDB. And it should know that this is date and time. However, unfortunately, RethinkDB stores dates and times as strings. You have to coerce them in your query to a date format. I find this a little strange, specifically because the geometry types are actually stored in a very specific way, and we're going to see that later on when we do geospatial querying. But if I was to come in here and write a query and say, hey, tell me what the type of this invoice date is, I can do that using .typeOf, it would tell me it is a string, as you see here, which is a little bit frustrating because you have to write conversions in line as you go. That's just the way it is. Wish I could give you a better answer, but what we need to do here is we need to convert our invoice date into ISO 8601 format. And if we do that, we can then ask for the year. And by doing that, we can finally get the right invoice dates. So here we can just say we want all the invoice dates with the year of 2012, and we can see the right answer, which is 82. Now there's more we can do with time in RethinkDB. You can use r.time to construct dates that you want to work against later on in a given query. Here you can use the time function as I'm showing, and it takes a year, month, day, hour, minute, second, time, and time zone. And you can use shortcuts and syntactic sugar. You can use r.January, for instance, if you don't want to type 1. Anyway, here I give it 4 arguments, and it gives me time. I can also just put in a 1, and same thing. So what did we learn using dates with RethinkDB? Well, I've learned a number of things as I've been using it over the years. The first is that always use .eq. You never know what's going to happen with that double or triple equals, so that's a good habit. The next is, if you need to query against any specific kind of date measurement, like year, month, day, quarter, whatever, just store it as its own attribute in a document. It's easy to do, and as I mentioned before, space is not necessarily a concern with document systems like RethinkDB. If you do need to do querying with dates, make sure you use to ISO 8601. It's a built-in function, and it'll make sure that it is a date or time pseudotype that you can then query away as you normally would. So all in all, querying with dates, yeah, a little bit rough around the edges, but it still can be workable.